This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work with another Wolff Responds. But before I get to it, I wanted to make one thing very clear. My heart, as that of most other people, goes out to the suffering of the people in Ukraine, the millions of refugees, the millions caught in the crossfire of competing military. There are always many reasons for war, but it is always true that the war is the worst possible way, the most costly way, the most inhumane way possible of working out conflicts, disagreements, however serious. That kind of suffering should never be imposed, as is being imposed by the participants to this conflict on the people of Ukraine. And that's not negotiable, and that's not deniable, and that has to be kept in mind as we try to figure out what is the cause here and what might be a solution. Here we are, many, many weeks into the Ukraine war, and the heat just keeps being increased, as does the suffering of the people on the ground, to which our hearts go out, as they must, in the scene of such suffering and such dislocation. But I want to talk to you about how to make sense of all of this. And to do that, I want to start with a brief parable. You can be walking down the street and you can go through a dark alley, and there somebody jumps out and confronts you and says to you with a smile, "I have a gun in one hand, I have a knife in another. I can either stab you or shoot you, but I believe in free choice, so you choose." The intelligent person refuses to choose. That's not an acceptable choice. The confused person begins to agonize over which way to choose. I think we face something like that in the Ukraine. And the way I'm going to get at it is to talk about a roughly similar situation called World War I. In World War I, we saw one of the worst catastrophes in human history. It wasn't called World War for nothing. Europe had never seen such murder, such destruction. Two of the countries that participated in World War I were Russia and the United States. And in each of them, there was a major left-wing leader who took a position I think we need to think about. In Russia, that leader was Lenin, and he argued that Russian people should not participate in that war. They shouldn't fight as soldiers, they should not take sides, and the argument he basically gave was that World War I was a struggle among competing capitalists using their respective countries to fight their competitive battles. This was not a fight that working people should suffer or die for. And for that, he was punished and sent into exile. In the United States, one of the leading left-wing leaders at the time, Eugene Victor Debs, made pretty much the same argument and was promptly arrested and put in jail, even though he ran a remarkably successful campaign for president. He didn't win, but he got an enormous number of votes based on the same argument. In other words, you can respond to a horrific war. You can respond to all the propaganda, for example, that the Kaiser Wilhelm, the German, was the epitome of evil, or that the British or the Americans or the French were the epitome of evil. Or you could do as Debs did and as Lenin did and say, no, 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 no. These are not the options you're going to make me choose between. What are we confronted with in Ukraine? Well, we're confronted, and I'm going to only use them as stand-ins. Biden in the United States, Putin in Russia, and Zelensky in Ukraine. To my way of thinking, you can kind of have them all. None of them are committed to anything remotely like the values of democracy and peace and self-determination. None of it. These are leaders horribly compromised by the declining capitalist systems over which they preside. Ukraine was a place noted for its corruption. Zelensky, like other leaders there, has been harsh on his opponents. The respect for civil liberties and civil rights in Ukraine is not a pretty history, before Zelensky and under him. Much the same can be said about Putin. But for the United States, look, let's be honest. The story of Ukraine with self-determination, to allow a nation to determine its own history, you have to open it up to different points of view that have to be openly, honestly, and freely debated. That doesn't happen in the Ukraine, and it hasn't for a long time. To say that the Russians shouldn't invade because invasion hobbles the victims' rights to self-determination? Coming from the United States, after having invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, having caused in both countries as much or more damage than the Russians so far in Ukraine, is not credible either. We don't have to choose among Putin, Biden, and Zelensky. We can endorse, as we should, the values of peace, of self-determination for every nation, including the Ukrainian people, and we can be against invasions, as we should. That's no way to resolve political, ideological differences. But we ought to uphold the values and not allow anyone to force us into a choice where all of the options contradict the values that we hold dear. If interventions in the national conversation, like this one, strike you as something important, missing in many areas that where it ought to be, then partner with us. Help us share these videos to friends, neighbors, co-workers, family. That's a way to extend our reach. We ask it of you, and we join you in doing it. And of course, if you can help as well with the financial costs of producing and distributing these videos, know that that would be appreciated as well. Thank you.